Good evening. I'm Bill Mulrow. Welcome to the Executive Mansion. We're happy to have you here for the public briefing. Earlier today, we spoke with the Senate in this very room, and we were scheduled to do the same with the Assembly. The Assembly, as you know, is still in session, so the Speaker has generously agreed to let us brief him by staff, which we have already done. So that just concluded. So we're happy to have you guys here to keep us on schedule. So again, thanks to the Speaker. As you guys know better than anyone, because you've covered it for the last 6 years, the state has pursued policies of creating good jobs, rebuilding the state's infrastructure, in education, and protecting the environment. This executive budget the governor is about to outline tonight builds on that base while also maintaining fiscal responsibility and giving the middle class a path forward while we're also cutting their taxes. So without much further ado, I'd like to I'll turn over the podium to the 56th governor of the state of New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First, for those of you who haven't been here before, welcome to the Executive Mansion. There is a great sense of history here. A lot of greats have lived in this house, a lot of history, and a lot of the story of New York you can just see by looking around this really, really beautiful house. To Bill Mulrow and Robert Mujica and the council, Alfonso David and Director of Operations, Jim Malatras, who really worked tremendously hard and produced what I think is the best budget of my administration. I want to applaud them and congratulate them, and let's give them a round of applause. To our Lieutenant Governor, pleasure to be with the Lieutenant Governor once again. This is now going to be her third briefing, I think. She will be an expert in budget detail after this is over. As Secretary Mulrow mentioned, I want to thank the Assembly. We briefed the Senate Republicans, we briefed the Senate Democrats in person. The Assembly was running late, and we had a private briefing with them, provided them with a budget first, and I want to thank them for their consideration. I'll go through a PowerPoint on the budget, and then any questions you have would be my pleasure to answer. The budget obviously tracks and follows the State of the State agenda that we laid out. And this is a very specific, focused, targeted agenda. This is about helping the middle class. The middle class has felt a lot of pain for a lot of years. In real wages, they're back to where they were 20 years ago. They've gotten hit on every front. And the government that was supposed to help them has become disconnected. And I think that's what we saw throughout the presidential election. That's what we saw on Election Day. And it happens to be a fact. So our prime focus this year is on addressing the problems of the middle class and all of the problems of the middle class. We want to cut income taxes for the middle class, reduce property taxes for the middle class, make college affordable, which is always the dream, that you will be able to send your child to college. And that dream has become more and more an illusion for too many New York and American families. Creation of more jobs and reducing prescription costs, which for middle-class households, poor households, senior citizens can be literally devastating. The statewide investments and initiatives that we're pursuing are robust but also focused. Clean Water Infrastructure Act is important to every community. Everyone will talk to you about an aging infrastructure. We also have additional problems, as we've seen in communities across the state, with contamination of water supplies. This is especially true in upstate New York, especially true on Long Island, where you had manufacturing areas. And that stain from the manufacturing era is still there and seeps into the groundwater. It seems like EPA is continually updating their list of dangerous chemicals and the allowable percentages. So testing, filtration to make sure water is safe and clean is important, and local governments can't do that on their own. We want to get ahead of that crisis with a $2 billion Clean Water Infrastructure Act. Part of our strategy on developing the economy has been to find and attract the growth industries of tomorrow. That's the story of nano in Albany. It's the story of photonics in Rochester. It's the story of solar in Buffalo. We believe the life sciences field has tremendous potential for New York, building off our higher education and our hospitals, which are some of the best on the planet. And we want to invest in the life sciences industry because we believe there's great potential for us there. The Regional Economic Development Councils that have been doing great work in upstate New York, we want to invest in another round of those economic development projects. Environmental Protection Fund, $300 million. We have a program for college affordability, which will be the first in the nation. One of the previous occupants of this house was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He would be proud of the college affordability program. What it says is families up to $125,000, free tuition to a public SUNY or CUNY school. And really, it's a move towards free college overall, because college is today what high school was 70 years ago. High school was free. Why? Because you needed high school. If you were to be successful, you needed high school. It was not a luxury. Today, you need college. If you want to be successful, if the state wants to be successful, if this nation wants to be successful, you need a college education. 30 years ago, we were the most college-educated population on the globe. Today, we're number 11. College debt is crushing young people. And you want to talk about the despondency of the middle class? Much of it goes back to this, that the future hope that my child was going to go to college is no longer attainable. New York, as I said, would be the first state in the nation. We're very excited about it. This continues our investment in state parks, which also leads into tourism. Our downtown revitalization initiative to revitalize many of the smaller downtown areas throughout the state. I Love New York, which is one of our great success stories. We invested about $150 million in I Love New York advertising, and revenues went up about $9 billion. I'll take that investment any day of the week. That is really, in part, the beauty of upstate New York, which is where the I Love New York campaign really focuses. When people see upstate New York, they love it and they come back. All we have to do is get them to go the first time. And that's what I Love New York is all about. Empire State Trail is a proposal that we have that I'll explain in a moment, but I'm very excited about that. It's a riding, hiking, biking trail that would go from New York City to Canada and from Albany to Buffalo, 750 miles. You don't have to do all 750 miles at once, but you can do it in segments. The part that goes through the Hudson Valley will go through some of the most beautiful geography on the planet, some of the most beautiful places of history on the planet. And Albany to Buffalo, it's a tour through the history of this nation. So we're very excited about that. Also, it'll be an economic development generator. Adventure New York are the DEC facilities across the state. Prescription drugs would also be the first program like it in the country. It would have the state capping the cost of prescription drugs, which have gone out of sight, and you have many pharmaceutical companies that are raising costs exponentially, and it has a devastating cost to the healthcare market as well as families themselves. We have a Buy American program, which would be the most aggressive in the country. Invest in manufacturing in this country and in this state. We need manufacturing jobs. We need more manufacturing jobs. So when we get a chance to boost American manufacturing, we should. Property taxes are the single highest tax burden in the state. It's not even close. And I think one of the greatest obstacles this state faces. I've been working on it for years. We have another way of getting at it in this presentation, which you'll hear in a moment. Raise the age is to raise the age of criminal liability. New York is one of only 2 states that still treats 16 and 17-year-olds as adults for criminal liability. And that has to change, and it has to change this year, and we have more proposals. The numbers, in an overview, the state starts with a $3.5 billion deficit. I propose funding education at $1 billion. The $1 billion is our growth cap plus $40 million. For those of you who are new, education used to be funded at all sorts of different amounts in the past. A few years ago, we came up with a formula, an inflation formula for education, and we said the state would fund education at that formula amount, so local school districts across the state could then plan. This budget funds it at that growth cap, which is 3.9% plus an additional $40 million. The college affordability program that we spoke about is $163 million. Medicaid also has a growth formula. We increase it at the formula amount, which is $567. The remainder of the state agencies are basically flat. That's a total state operating budget of 1.9%. It's under 2%, which is the fiscal discipline we brought to the state and we try to bring to local governments. What they call the all funds, when you add federal funds, transfer funds, it's 3.4%. Quick review of the spending. As I said, state operating is 1.9. Medicaid is at the cap at 3.2%. School aid is 4.1. I fund it above the formula cap. Executive agencies, our budget are basically flat again, and remainder is basically flat. The Office of the Controller also comes in at 2%. I want to thank the Controller for his cooperation. The Office of the Attorney General also curbed spending and came in at 2%. The Office of Court Administration, I want to thank the Chief Judge. She also came in at 2%. The state legislature is at 3%. I don't control the state legislative budget, as you know, but they propose it, they submit it. They are at 3%, which obviously is higher than the other offices and also higher than the benchmark that the state has set. One of the main aspects of this budget is tax policy. And this tax policy in this budget does 2 things. Number 1, we do not cut taxes for millionaires. Number 2, we do cut taxes for the middle class, okay? On the millionaires tax, we would extend the current millionaires tax rate and keep it for an additional 3 years. We have a $3.5 billion deficit. Frankly, we don't have the resources to lose the millionaires' revenue now and have this state function the way it should. The loss of revenue from the millionaires' tax would be about $4 billion over 2 years. $4 billion is a devastating amount of revenue to lose for the state. And not only could you not do college affordability education increase, you couldn't do the middle class tax cut, which I think is very, very important. The millionaires' tax, as they call it, is paid by 45,000 taxpayers who contribute. Half of the people are not residents of the state. So you're talking about a small number of people, but you're talking about a tremendous deficit that it would leave at $4 billion. At the same time, we do a middle-class tax cut for 6 million New Yorkers. from $40,000 to $150,000. The rate would go from 6.85 to 6.45, and 150 to 300,000, 685 to 665. And these would be phased in, and they would continue to drop as the years go on. 1/3 of the state budget is education. We would raise it by $1 billion. When you look at our spending over the past years, it has increased by 30% in just 6 years, to the highest level in history. The people of the state believe that education is a priority. I agree with them. And we put our proverbial money where our mouth is, the highest level of education spending in history. This gives you an idea of what past governors have proposed. My father, Mario Cuomo, over 12 years, proposed on average a 1.8% increase. George Pataki, a 1.2% increase. Governor Spitzer and Governor Patterson combined a 1.5% increase. If you look at my 6 years, I've proposed a 2.4% increase in the initial budget. The first year we had a real deficit, so we actually cut education spending the first year. If you take out the first year, our average has been a 4% increase. So you can see that my budgets have always been exceedingly generous with education spending. Within education spending, you have $150 million for high-needs schools, to make them community hubs. You have $800 million for pre-K, which is a program that we're very excited about. $35 million for after-school slots in high-poverty areas. You want a place for children to go. You want a safe place. You want them off the streets. And that's what this program funds. $163 million for the free college, as we mentioned, for middle-class families. Part of this would provide funding for the DREAM Act, which we've proposed and talked about for many years, but we still haven't passed. Rating in the cost of prescription drugs, this is another first for the state of New York. This is a major problem for seniors. It's a major problem for middle-class families, and it's just an abuse of the consumer. Some of the increases in prescription drugs is just abusive. I mean, there's no other word to use for it. What this would do is set up a state review board which would establish the cap price of a drug that is sold to Medicaid. And they would set a cap price that the state, through the Medicaid program, will pay for that drug. If the company sells that drug in the private market, the amount in excess of that cap will be assessed a surcharge of about 60% of that amount. And that 60% will go to the health insurance companies to write down that cost. No other state in the country has done it. It is creative, it's aggressive, we believe it's legal, and we believe it'll make a major difference in people's lives. The heroin opioid epidemic is all across the state and is only getting worse. Literally, it is from one end of the state to the other. We have a 6-point plan that is comprehensive and combats it, from treatment to law enforcement to high schools for recovery, and making fentanyl a controlled substance and analogs thereof. Buy America Act, we would extend the Buy America provisions for all procurements over $100,000. It would be the strongest law in the country. Buy American, protect American jobs, create American jobs. $2 billion for the clean water infrastructure, as we discussed. Local communities could fix existing infrastructure. They could put in filtration devices. Owasco Lake, for example, has had a problem with certain algae blooms in the lake. They also get their drinking water from the lake. They need an enhanced filtration system at several $1 million. They would really have no way to fund this, frankly, so especially some of the smaller communities, what we went through in Hoosick Falls. So this would be a fund that would do just that. We passed a program called Affordable New York. We sent the bill up. Affordable New York is the redesign of the 421A program. It will create 112,000 affordable units in New York City. The Senate was holding $2 billion in a memorandum of understanding until we passed the successor to 421A. We now have an agreement. The money was supposed to be released upon execution of the MOU by the two parties, REBNY and the organized labor representative. We've accomplished that. The Senate should now release the $2 billion. $70 million for I Love New York. As I mentioned, a $150 million investment. And we had a $9 billion increase in visitor spending. The more we can do to promote tourism, the better. We also have a proposal that would allow alcohol and beer to be sold in movie theaters. And it would be joined with an incentive program to incentivize the movie theaters to sell New York wine and beer. It is a very big industry for us. We have developed it. It's going gangbusters, anything we can do to encourage it. It's especially successful in upstate New York. It would require a law change to allow alcohol and beer to be sold in a movie theater and incentivize New York products to be sold in that venue. We have an agreement with NYRA on a privatization bill that we will also be sending up that privatizes NYRA. We had taken it over. It is restructured, essentially, and sustainable. And this bill would continue the VLT support, but turn it over to private control. Empire State Trail would be 750 miles. It builds on existing trails that are there now, the Erie Canalway, the Hudson River Valley Greenway. This is the existing trail, so you can see a large part of it is already in place. Maybe 60, 70% is already in place. In 3 phases, we would close the gaps. Phase 1 would be 70 miles, Phase 2, 80 miles. Phase 3 is 196 because you have that long leg from Albany to Canada through the North Country, which is beautiful but long. That would take the 3rd year. In total, 750 miles. It is a beautiful natural resource. I think it would be a phenomenal tourist attraction. And when you're talking tourism, you're talking jobs in upstate New York, and that is a major priority for my entire administration. Ride sharing, Uber, Lyft is allowed in New York City. It is not allowed in upstate New York. The downstate taxi cab companies oppose Uber and Lyft. I understand that. But I also understand that upstate matters, and it's unfair and unjust that you have ride sharing in New York City, but you don't pass it in upstate New York. I have said many times that I believe upstate New York has gotten short shrift from the legislature. I think over the decades when their economy was stumbling, Albany could have been more help and they weren't. And this is another example where upstate matters, they need help, they need this law passed, and the legislature should get it passed this year. Local property tax is the #1 tax in the state of New York. New York is a high tax state, people say. The average state income tax is $1,800. The average property tax is $4,700. That, my friends, is the greatest obstacle that the state of New York has, getting the property taxes down. It's not new. Franklin Delano Roosevelt complained about it often and bitterly. That quote could be a quote that came out of my mouth for the past 5 years. It is about the duplication, size, and waste of local governments. You have over 10,000 local governments in the state of New York. And there is very little incentive or energy to find any savings, any efficiencies, anything. We've tried to do this a lot of different ways. We've incentivized them. We've provided rewards. But it remains a problem. It's not just downstate New York. Upstate New York, by percentage of home value, pays the highest property taxes in the United States. This is an idea of the cost: Westchester, $11,000 average bill; Nassau, 10; Suffolk, 8; New York State, 5; USA, 3. This year we have a new plan that is simple and inarguable, in my opinion. We give the county executive the authority to convene the local governments, which the county executive will now say they don't have. So, for example, Mark Poloncarz is county executive of Erie. 900 local governments in Erie County. County executive calls together 900 local governments. And the 900 local governments deal with one question: how do we find efficiencies among the governments? What are we doing that we can find savings by cooperating or working together? For example, you have 900 communities. We all buy police cars. Why don't we all bid out our police cars at the same time? We all buy health insurance. Why don't we place our health insurance through one contract? We all have offices, 900 different offices. Why don't we co-locate offices to find savings? I'm not talking about consolidating governments, just getting governments to work together to find savings. Not everybody needs a $300,000 dump truck. You can share equipment, you can share real estate, you can share a lot of back office functions and find savings. We have been going through this on the state side for 5 years. The state agencies, the funding has been flat. It has been zero. If you're at zero increase, you're really at a negative number, right? Because everything's going up. The lease payment's going up, electricity is going up. How have we made it work? The agencies had to get out of their comfort zone and had to work together and had to find savings. By the way, like every family in the state of New York has had to do. Why should government be exempt? Well, they want to have their own everything. I understand that. I want to have my own everything. We can't afford it. Let the county executive convene the local governments, let them come up with a plan, let them put the plan on the ballot in November, and let the people in that county decide if they accept the plan or not. All you're doing is asking the question of the local governments: see if you can find savings by cooperating. Frankly, it's outrageous that that question hasn't been asked, and hasn't been asked in a way that the elected officials are held accountable. Raise the age. We're one of only 2 states. This is for nonviolent felons. We've done everything that we can administratively, but we need the law changed, and we would like to do it this year. We have a 10-point ethics proposal, constitutional amendment limiting outside income, constitutional amendment imposing term limits for elected officials, an independent advisory opinion before earning outside income to make sure there's no conflict of interest. And I would do this for the legislature and for the executive. Right now, the legislature goes to their legislative ethics committee, and their legislative ethics committee will tell them whether or not they think it's a conflict. People don't have confidence when a body is getting advice from its own body. I also have executive employees who get outside income. Let's take an independent, outside legal expert and go to that body to get a ruling on conflict of interest. It protects the government. It also protects the person who's actually earning the income. Close the LLC loophole, which is just a pure loophole, which we proposed almost every year that I've been governor. Subject local officials to the financial disclosure that we now do for state officials. Institute public financing and campaign finance reforms. Increase transparency through comprehensive reforms to FOIL for the legislature. It is the legislature still has not accepted the FOIL laws for the legislature, and I think the time has come and passed. Expand the authority of the State Inspector General, who does SUNY and CUNY, to the not-for-profits that are under SUNY and CUNY, which is where we've had a lot of issues, and the IG does not now have authority to those not-for-profits. Procurement reforms, we call this a blackout period. Once an RFP goes out, a bidder to the RFP cannot make a political contribution, and the award winner cannot make a contribution for 6 months following. Create a new Inspector General for the Port Authority of New York. Port Authority went through a terrible scandal called Bridgegate. Since Bridgegate, we have adopted no ethics reforms. Why? Because the state passed one bill, New Jersey passed another bill, the bills are different, so no reforms have been done. And the Port Authority needs reforms desperately. And this is a minimum to make sure the Port Authority is respecting the rights and the funds of New Yorkers. Create a new Inspector General for SED, which I believe should be picked by the legislature. In any event, and taking a step back, I think this is going to be a remarkable year of progress for the state. On the legislative agenda side, we'll reduce middle-class taxes. We'll have an historic high in education aid. We will have a national precedent in college affordability. We'll create jobs, but also, apart from all of this, apart from the legislative actions, we are in the midst of the most aggressive development program that this state has ever undertaken. And these are real, tangible accomplishments all across the state. You don't see it if you sit in this town. But New Yorkers and communities all across the state are seeing it every day. And these are not ideas or proposals or blueprints or hopes and dreams. We have the most comprehensive infrastructure development that the state has done, and it's all across the state. Again, it's not about studying or preparing, it is about actually building. These things are happening. We're building a new airport at LaGuardia. That's happening. We're building a new JFK International Airport, finally. 2 new major airports in downstate New York. We're building a new airport in Syracuse. We're building a new airport at MacArthur, which is on Long Island, which has great potential, where we can link it right to the Long Island Railroad, and MacArthur can take a lot of traffic from JFK and from LaGuardia. We're building a new airport in Rochester, because airports today are the new front door for commerce and business, right? And if you want to be competitive and you want to be successful, you need to have the facilities to match it. Elmira Corning, new airport. Plattsburgh, not only a new airport, but we're making it an economic development hub with a distribution center, et cetera. New Schenectady Rail Station, Tappan Zee Bridge is going up on time. New Penn Station, new Long Island Railroad Concourse, Albany Convention Center. We're going to break ground in the next week on a 1 million square foot addition to the Jacob Javits Center to make it one of the most competitive convention centers in the country. 4 new MTA stations in the Bronx, which will open up the Bronx to development in a way it's never been before. Kingsbridge Armory, which can bring 9 recreation ice skating rinks to the middle of the Bronx to give children an alternative to the streets. Orchard Beach, the same thing in the Bronx. Hunts Point, a new regional food market. Kosciuszko Bridge, we're about to complete the first span, which is very exciting. That goes between Brooklyn and Queens. We're redoing the Queens Midtown Tunnel. We're redoing the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. We did the 2nd Avenue subway, which is done on time and is really a masterful addition for the city. MTA is redoing 33 stations, East Side Access. We're buying 1,000 new subway cars. We're buying 2,000 new buses. We are illuminating all the bridges in New York City with different color lights. And the bridges can then be coordinated and choreographed to music. So literally, you'll have bridges all across the New York City area that are choreographed. Nothing like this has been done on the planet. You have some cities that have done bridge lighting projects, and a single bridge lighting project has turned out to be a great tourist attraction. And people come just to see one bridge lit. Imagine New York Harbor with all those bridges and all of it choreographed. Open road tolling, which we are doing downstate, and we're going to be doing on the thruway upstate. New Gateway Tunnel, which connects New York and New Jersey. We're improving the Long Island Railroad on Long Island by building 2 new tracks, which is one of the reasons why the commute can be so difficult from Long Island. Modernizing 16 LIRR stations. We're opening tourism centers. We did the first one on Long Island to spur the I Love New York experience. We're redoing Jones Beach. Brookhaven Laboratory, which is a great economic engine for the island, is going to be connected to the Long Island Railroad. Town of Woodbury, Route 131, the Empire State Trail I hope to get. We've rehabbed the New York State Fair. It broke all attendance records in history last year. Highest attendance in history, and now we're coming back with phase 2. Saab just signed on to move to Syracuse. Photonics is growing in Rochester, Norsk Titanium in the North Country. Clarkson-Trudeau Joint Enterprise. This budget funds the National Comedy Center in Jamestown. Lucille Ball, favorite of Casey Seilers, he'll be there first. Solar City, we have Panasonic and Tesla moving into Buffalo. If you had told someone that 5 years ago, they would think you need the state's opioid program. It's amazing, the rebirth of Buffalo, and we're coming back with what we call Buffalo Billion Squared now. An article from this past weekend talked about millennials coming back to Buffalo. This is after decades of young people leaving. Now you have young people coming back to Buffalo. At the next 1,400 jobs. So the arrows are pointed in the right direction. I hope for a good legislative session. I think we can have national firsts, prescription drugs, college affordability. I know you're going to see a new New York just in terms of redevelopment, in terms of the transportation facilities, the infrastructure, et cetera. And again, you've never had as robust a development program as we have undertaken, and we will make a reality.